Hello, today is October 24th, 2018. This is the kubeadm office hours. We have a bunch of stuff going on, so I haven't looked at the agenda right now. Let's talk about the first. I want to talk before we even go into the details here. Let's talk about the tests. Lubomir brought it up. So for those who want to know the background, there was a change to the end-to-end testing framework, which is basically like a refactoring to allow people to import the framework without dragging in all of Kubernetes. But what it exposed was a brittleness across all of test infra with how we are running the tests. And there's a problem in the intent testing framework in the fact that they kind of bake in a bunch of suppositions around provider. And that percolation of provider information was what's causing the issue. So Lubomir, you want to go into details about the current state of things you're looking at?
So the old version of the end-to-end framework was doing a warning when somebody passes a provider that is not known. It basically spits a warning and it continues using whatever it's using. But right now it returns an error. So Kubernetes Anywhere was an unknown provider. And right now we basically have an error for that. At the same time, in test infra, where we define the test jobs, we move to local as the provider, and we removed Kubernetes Anywhere as a provider. So now the end-to-end testing framework has to handle local. So we have a couple of options here, and I wanted to show the PRs that we have. Perhaps I can share the screen quickly.
Go ahead.
Okay. Let me open the actual PRs. So we had a bunch of comments here. We had a little bit of a discussion with Ben Dielder and Sendu. So currently, all the jobs we have use local for Kubernetes Anywhere. And I mean, this is okay. We can treat Kubernetes Anywhere as a local provider instead of a unique provider. So this PR here basically handles the fact that Kubernetes Anywhere still has to prepare a GCP project for it to work. So in a way, it's not really a local provider because it still needs a GCP project. But this PR alone is going to fix all the failures we have currently.
I've already took a look at that and LGDM approved, but I think that's going to be, is it still on hold?
Yeah, it's on hold because Ben was not really sure whether we should do that or pretty much merge the other PR, which is by Patrick Ollie. And yeah, yeah, you know the other PR.
Yeah, both of them are Band-Aids, right? Like, I don't think, I put a comment in there like, I'm okay if you want to Band-Aid either or. There's a bigger problem that we need to address, not necessarily in 113, but definitely in 114. Like, we can Band-Aid around this stuff, but like the provider code and how it jigs through the end-to-end testing framework is an abomination unto God. It was never meant to be there. It was a hack in the beginning that lasted far beyond its usefulness. And what Patrick tried to do was to push the provider code or push it underneath so the dependency wasn't directly on framework itself, but was underneath the separate library in framework. So as a result, it kind of percolated all these problems through. And because he also changed the default from being like a warning to an error, that caused everyone to fail. It's unfortunate that we are in this state, but it's one of those things where like it's a tech debt that we kind of It was a bubble. It was a tech debt bubble, right? And we've just kind of built up this tech debt in the end-to-end testing framework to the point where he tried to pay down some of the debt and like, whoops, we found more bodies buried, which is unsurprising to me, given what I know about the end-to-end testing framework. So I'm fine with, you could probably do both and it wouldn't matter. If you did this, if you merged yours and his, it wouldn't make a difference from my understanding. And because we, in the kubeadm tests, we don't exercise any provider specific code. We only exercise basically basic conformance because we're actually doing the provisioning and deployment. And we're not actually even setting up the cloud provider integration, that, from my understanding. So it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, I think it's a question like all of these kubetest integrations that are basically the deployers of kubetest. I mean, should we qualify Kubernetes anywhere as a
No.
local or?
It shouldn't. Well, Kubernetes Anywhere should be a. We need to refactor the end-to-end testing framework is what we need to do, right? A or B shouldn't matter for right now, but the actual pushing out of the provider-specific code and testing structure is something that we absolutely need to do.
I think both of these make sense, and I would suggest that it might be a reason to keep the one in the E2E framework to make that change so that when we rip out providers, then all of the like code calling test doesn't crash as we remove them. Because I think the real tech debt is that we just don't want providers in the E2E framework in the core repo eventually.
Yeah, it shouldn't. For the core integrations to the extension points, the only thing that people need, they shouldn't even be subject to knowing the details of provider unless the tests themselves actually go through and touch a very specific provider somehow in a roundabout way as part of the tests. And I would say like you should, that code shouldn't even be in the KK repo.
Right. I would think long term, as we move the provider implementations out, we should also move out the providers from the E2E framework. So I kind of like not crashing on an unknown provider so that like in the PR, when we remove the provider, we don't have to also flip all the tests. Like, yeah, the provider just becomes a no-op.
So I only added a comment on that specific PR is that we need a separate issue to log to track this stuff, and and a comment inside there that this is indeed tech debt. What we're doing, we're like glossing over the fact that the provider jiggery inside of the end-to-end testing framework is a wonderland.
So I guess we should really merge this one in kubetest, and also it means that we have to update kubetest, the image itself.
Yeah, I would say probably we should do both. I mean, so the kubetest one also just makes sense to me because it's not actually a GCP provider.
Yeah, it's kind of in between. It uses GCP for sure because it needs a project to be allocated.
Right, but it's no different than like as far as the tests are concerned, it's no different than like if we had a bunch of machines somewhere physically and we booted Kubernetes Anywhere on them somehow.
Yes, definitely. So I can pretty much unhold this right now if you guys agree. All right. And for the other PR, I guess we're going to wait on Patrick and we can merge it too.
Mm-hmm. So we don't actually have an agenda item listed for the next one stuff. Are we done with the testing stuff?
Yes.
Okay. Hopefully we should get signal back by tomorrow-ish, maybe?
So for the kubeadm GC master, we should get one in like a couple of hours, I think.
Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is Fabrizio has got a ton of PRs for the phases stuff ongoing. One of them should be ready to be merged now, which is the kubelet one, the kubelet start phase. There's a bunch of other ones that are kind of WIP, and then I know there's one specific question on the stacked etcd masters. I will paste the issue inside of the meeting notes. And Fabrizio, do we want to talk about this here?
Is Fabrizio here?
He was, yeah, he is. Fabrizio is on.
I mean, if he cannot talk, I can explain the situation.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you now.
Okay. So the problem for TCD is the following. When we started the WIP about stacked TCD, we decided to have to use the API server advertised address as address for the TCD peer configuration.
Yes.
Okay, this worked fine, but there is a case. I don't know how much this case is used by out in the field, that a user can set the API server advertised address equal to the load balancer address, so equal to something that is not a real address on the machine where we are installing a TCD.
But that's what the control plane address is for, right? Like the control plane address is specifically for the load balance endpoint.
Yes, but you can set the control plane address equal to the load balancer address,
Yep.
and the API server equal to the load balancer address.
Well, that would be weird, but okay. At least in the kubeadm config, that would be weird.
Okay. Excuse me. So this can happen. So if we consider this case, we should change the PR and add an address for a TCD, or local TCD, and then manage it. Otherwise, we are fine.
I think we are fine. I think we can always remember too, like if we are promoting the config to v1 beta 1, which means so long as we don't remove things, we can easily add things to v1 beta 2. So if there becomes an issue, right, where somebody, if this becomes a problem for folks and we don't document it well enough, then we can always add a separate field. I do think it would be redundant, but I think getting feedback from the wild is also useful. I'll let Chuck talk, because he wrote the original stack. He worked with Jason to work on the original Stack Masters doc. I don't see a problem though from my side.
Yeah, I don't think I quite understand the problem yet. I'm not sure I really follow why people would be setting the API server address to be the same as the control plane endpoint. And I'm not sure how that relates exactly to the local etcd advertise endpoint.
So how you can set your control plane. So this was a long discussion we had when we started implementing HA. And basically, this kind of configuration was the configuration used by OpenShift, if I remember well. And so what is the difference? Is the difference that all your API server instance will get the same advertised address, even if there are more than one instance. This can be useful, for instance, because you can use the same certificate on all.
Right.
Okay, and so basically you can scale dynamically your control plane without recreating certificates.
Okay, I see.
So this is the history. Now, if we use the advertised address for the control plane and we follow this strange pattern to give the advertised address, the load balanced address, basically etcd will never start.
Yeah, I might have to think about this a little more. I did less work on the stack stuff than Jason. Are you so you were asking if or what, I guess what was the question? It was adding an endpoint for etcd.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I can. So the decision is.
Is that because when we look up the local host, or like we look up the address of etcd, it would use the advertised address and then append the port to it, and so the advertised address is going to be wrong in that case?
Yes, exactly. So
yeah,
in my opinion, we can decide to go on as we are, and
I think
add a node to the release node.
Also, we should just point it out in the instructions, because we're still going to have a stacked masters instructions guidelines. We can basically point out, that like you should not try to override the advertised address. Just you shouldn't even specify it. You should only specify the control plane endpoint for your load balancer.
Right? Yes, but please be aware that this impact only the single impact also the single master cluster.
Well, yes. So long as we outline, again, so long as we outline the instructions for both scenarios, I think I'm okay with it, because we'd have to explicitly do something, right?
Okay, so basically we are supporting the scenario where the user sets all the API server with the same advertised address, only with external etcd.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
Okay, last really teeny bit about this is that if we want to make the installation of a new etcd member for each control plane optional or not?
I do.
I guess the question is etcd required to be on the master node or the control plane node?
Yes, the question is if we are going, we move on having the number of the etcd equal to the number of control plane, or we allow user to do crazy things.
I think
sorry, go ahead, Tim.
I think you could option out of it, but I think defaulting makes sense. I think nowadays, in the early days of Kubernetes, the idea that you horizontally scale the control plane was a thing, especially the API servers. Nowadays, there's been so many optimizations since the beginning of the project that the idea of doing it outside of the quorum zone is not really something people would do, right? Like it's antithetical to your deployment and more difficult to manage. So most people would just do it based on quorum numbers, right? So I find it kind of odd that we have this notion that we have a microservices style deployment, but we're still doing it Borg like. So the control plane is just really smashed together. So I think I think we should default to doing the full control plane, including etcd, and see what people say. And we can always add an option to allow the ability to not deploy etcd.
But do you want to add the option in this cycle, or not?
Wait and see. I think we should get feedback on this one from the wild. If people are really, I don't think most people will care. I think it's kind of it's an anti-pattern to want to set up that kind of deployment.
Okay, so I will check again the PR, but we are almost ready for a final review.
It seems strange to scale etcd with the control plane to me, but I'm happy to wait for feedback. Just because you sometimes want 2 control planes, but 3 etcd members, or maybe 3 etcd members and and like 4 control plane nodes.
You can do it, but the question is, does it make any sense, right?
Yeah.
And the answer is no. It doesn't really make any sense given what we know about the components nowadays. So, if a person wants to do it, I don't see any problem with, it's a question of like options for the user, really.
Yeah.
And I don't have enough information for how people are using this in the wild, but sometimes having sane defaults is better than allowing the sort of systems engineering fiasco, which is like, there's a knob for everything. Right?
Yeah. I think waiting for feedback is a good idea.
Yes, and we should always remember that if the user wants to be totally free, he can do external etcd.
Exactly, and that will basically not deploy the etcd.
And what we are supporting is staked etcd, which is something in the middle between a local etcd and something better.
Yep. And I think in the next iteration, the next cycle, we're talking internally about how we could potentially manage certificates as part of a NIT and join as a separate thing outside of copying stuff around using SCP. So like, I think we're fine. I think we're good.
Great.
Now, that's my opinion. I want to stop there and make sure that other people have their say too. I don't want to force this down people's throat.
I agree with the etcd member for each control plane being the default.
I'm pretty sure Jason would also agree, given that we talked about wanting to do stack masters. So it's only in the hyperscale deployments where things start to get weird. And even then, usually push etcd outside of there as an external thing.
Yes, we may get some feedback from our users in China who might object against having an etcd member for each control plane instance. Because it doesn't scale very well.
Well, that's where I think like the external etcd member is the simple answer, right? Just manage it externally. And with the work that's ongoing in the SIG to have the etcd ADM, or how would I say that, etcdm, that would solve the problem too. I like that. Then you kind of defer to the idea of just push it outside the cluster. And to be honest, the scalability is directly proportional to the amount of memory you have, just because of the way how etcd works. Not that I know anything about this, but I led the team that did all the initial profiling. So if you vertically scale your memory, you can get a larger cluster.
I wrote the note in the minutes.
All right. So other topics. I'll pause here. I have another topic, but I'll wait till the end to see whether folks have other topics here.
I would like to talk. Yesterday there was an interesting discussion in Slack about the extending the kubeadm config in order to being able to generate the OpenAPI spec, and then we can build. So we can build on top of this. For instance, for kind to use to only pass different patch of the config instead of the full config.
Yeah, I walked back to a thread that had like 60 comments, and I said, I am bankrupt. You guys, you want to start the conversation here?
So I actually just want to throw in real quick that I played around with using Kustomize without the spec last night, and I didn't actually really have any problems with it for the most part. I mean, there's still some places where, like, if you want to append something instead of completely overwriting it, you need to use a JSON merge patch instead of just specifying a YAML patch, but it works pretty well. I'm not actually sure if we need the spec.
I have a question here. So, were you able to handle like all the different flavors of the config, or was it an isolated case for a single config version?
I was not trying to handle different flavors. I suspect if you're doing an advanced enough thing to want to like add modifications to the config, you need to do it for the version you're targeting, instead of something that somehow knows different versions.
Yeah.
But I can dig out. I had a pretty simple config. It let you take like a base config and another config and just merge them, and that is like exactly what I needed. And I suspect some other people will. I'm going to attempt to integrate this into Kind as the way to do advanced configuration, and I'll report back.
All right. I mean, I haven't looked at customized. That's my problem here, so I don't have experience with it. If others have any feedback, it would be great to have a discussion about it. Like, also, it's a question if we are going to integrate this as part of kubeadm. Yesterday, I was told that customize does not expose a backend, so we cannot vendor the backend.
So I've talked to them about this previously, and one option they mentioned is that everything is implemented as Cobra commands. So you can like just kind of import the app. Another option I thought about is just shipping the binary on the nodes, and then running it there.
Yes, I mean, for Kind is going to work even if you ship the binary, but for kubeadm, if you want to integrate something like that in kubeadm, we have to vendor it. And, yeah, like probably.
Oh yeah, I don't know if it should be like built into kubeadm necessarily.
Mm-hmm. My understanding was that Fabrizio was thinking about something like that. The idea to modify the cluster while the cluster is running using something like that.
Yeah, I don't quite need that just before the cluster is created.
Okay. What I'm interesting is to understand if there is something that in how we are designing the API today that blocks this scenario. Then, and it seems to me that we are pretty fine because customizers use build on top of the standard Kubernetes API. And then if and how we will integrate this in kubeadmin is not clear. What I was thinking about is is when the user is to use some part of this kind of mechanism for when the user want to change the cluster.
So
discussion there is still in the very early stages. So
yeah, exactly. I want
to. Today, what is important for me is to understand if we see some blocker, but it seems that we are fine.
Yeah, I'm very supportive of the merge patch capabilities before you create. I'm a lot less supportive, and I think it'll be a lot more difficult to manage inside of kubeadm proper without doing a separate controller that is part of cluster API for doing deltas on configs, because you really need you would really need to take the config and then rationalize it on the cluster. And I don't think that actually belongs in kubeadm proper. I think that's a separate controller that would use kubeadm or consume it as a rectifier for clusters if you really wanted to get there, right? But
yeah.
Again, I think this is way too early. I want to focus on the GA stuff.
I agree. It is too early. But I'm having a look at the kubeadmin channel, and there are people that often eat this problem. So sooner or later we have to jump on it.
Yes, there's a bunch of problems. We should probably pick the ones that are the most common and solve the easy cases first. But that's a separate thing.
This cycle, the most common problem is people getting stuck with stack authenticity and HI cluster created with too many manual steps.
And the config changes also.
Yes, but this was at the beginning of the cycle. Now we are getting good feedbacks about the updated documentations.
Yes.
Okay. Other topics?
Do you have anything to discuss about the timeouts?
I said in the issue, I don't think we need a map because I think that's too fractal for a user to consume. And the 90% common use case is API server timeout.
For the join workflow, we have also the discovery timeout.
Discovery timeout.
The discovery timeout is the timeout that applies when at the beginning of kubeadmin join, when kubeadmin try to get the cluster info. So it's really the TLS authentication at the beginning.
Yeah, but we can. I don't think that needs to be customizable for most user scenarios. We could default to something. I haven't heard of anybody having that issue. We could default to something obscenely high.
This is strange because this is the only timeout that today exists as a field in the kubeadmin API. I don't know the history, but today there is a field in the discovery in the discovery struct. If you look at the types in the API.
This one?
Yes, and you search for TLS timeout. Or timeout, maybe it was changed by, okay.
Discovery.
And it applies to the bootstrap token timeout mainly. Also to the file timeout, so to both the methods.
Can you scroll? Can you? Because you're doing it on a per struct basis, I wouldn't use a map, and you're already doing the refactoring for the struct objects. I think having leaving the timeouts that are there for the other portions is fine, and then having the timeout specific to the API server because you're already doing that modification for the objects, so that the API server has its timeout, the discovery token has its timeout. I think the map is confusing. Because the person's going to have to specify, a set of strings that they won't necessarily know all the details of, or could easily make a mistake on, right?
Okay, so you're suggesting to have a timeout inside the substructures?
Yes, inside the substructure for the API server.
And this will be the timeout for the control plane to start.
Correct. Okay,
so basically, I have to revert and I have to sync with Ross, with Gregory that is going to implement the control plane substructures.
Okay. Does that jive? Does that make sense, or am I crazy on that one?
So I think that we have to have a good set of reasons to create substructures here. is this even planned for the next iteration of the config? Like, where are we going to put the substructures?
It's already in progress, I thought.
Like under cluster config?
Yes.
So we're going to have the control plane substructures here. I think that it makes perfect sense, but do we have a use case that somebody is going to need a timeout for the scheduler, for instance?
Nope. Scheduler and controller manager are basically completely asynchronous. And they're also, we need to modify the deployment. So to set it to almost be a daemon set. And they don't require anything to be online.
So there will be only one timeout in the API server, if I got it right.
That is correct.
And we also have a hard-coded timeout for the images, I think, for pulling the images.
Yeah, but that doesn't need to be in config.
Tim, sorry. We need the timeout for the control plane also for join, but we will have these at control plane level, so at cluster level. So sorry, not necessary. I was just thinking about how to control the timeout for the join control plane workflow.
Yeah.
But we will use the same timeout used for the first master.
There was an issue that flowed in. Well, let's see. Are there other things about the timeout stuff that I think we're in congruence?
Yeah, I think it's all right. Like you said earlier, we can always expose more flags in time, as long as we don't remove them.
Yes.
The only issue I'm aware of timeout are related to Raspberry.
Well, that would be you would affect the same timeout by adding the API server timeout bump to the control plane. You would effectively be solving that problem. It's two problems with one solution to fix two problems.
Well, for these Raspberry Pi timeouts specifically, we were also speculating about a race condition. So
yes.
So it's kind of like a unknown territory there unless we start debugging and deploying end-to-end tests on Raspberry Pis.
Yeah, it's not a big target. It's what a lot of developers like to tinker with, but it's not a big use case for customers or consumers.
Okay, got it. I will sync with Greg about this.
We should add that to the notes here.
I'm adding.
Okay. What time is it? 42. We are, just a reminder that we are a little under 1 month till the hard freeze date. We already have a bunch of stuff underway, so I'm not terribly concerned. There was one other thing I totally forgot about it. I didn't write it down. I should have. There was one PR that came in from random, I think it was from SUSE, wanting to modify the structures. I thought it was weird. I CC'd you on it, Fabrizio, yesterday or today.
Oh, I went through 10 PR today. I didn't remember.
Yeah, there was another topic I wanted to talk about too. Was I think Lubomir is doing a great job. I think you've been stepping up in a lot of different places. I think because you're so active in this SIG, I'd like to promote you to approver unless there's like objections from other folks. I do think that some things we're going to need cross coverage on still, like these really important config changes. So we in general, like us three who are approvers for kubeadm, shouldn't do things unilaterally without like making sure that we all agree on basically phases changes and config changes. But other than, if we already are in agreement on those things, then, you know, one person can take it and we can federate the work.
Yeah, I have a couple of concerns. First of all, I have some experience, but I know that some people have more experience than me. Obviously, people like Jason, Alexander. And the other concern is that I haven't yet been a reviewer for 3 months. You know, we have to follow the membership rules unless we want to make an exception in my case.
Well, I think we can plan for as soon as 114 is out the door, because that should be a full cycle, or 113 is out the door. And then it'll be just a formality at that point. But I do, the problem with Jason is that he's already full-time on cluster API AWS work. So I don't see him letting up anytime soon on that work. And I don't want to spread people too thin. So he's already going to be full-time on that for a while. And I'm sure over time, that work will probably tail off. And kubeadm work, I don't see tailing off. I think there's going to be some back and forth between cluster API and kubeadm work for a while, right? They're two parts of a story.
And Peter and Alexander are experienced, but oftentimes they're probably busy and they have to miss meetings. So Peter, in the case of Peter, he is in a completely different time zone.
Yeah, Peter's been a conundrum. I would like to have promoted Peter over the time, and he was very prolific and active for a while, but then he dropped off, completely dropped off. I don't know what happened. If he can somehow sync up with regards to some of these broader changes that are going on, and is informed about what the plans are, then I wouldn't have problems, because Peter's had a long history working on this area, and has been super helpful over time. So
yeah, maybe right now he has other obligations too. And yeah, I sent the email and I asked if people want to help with the approval process.
I responded this morning. I can't throw other people under the bus. Like, I can't throw Jason under the bus because he's not going to have enough bandwidth. So it'd be the same boat that I'm currently in, right? Like I'm involved in too many things, and I think it's part of the legacy and part of being on a startup, right? If solved A or B, then I could have more time spent on doing getting things unblocked and moving faster.
So me and Rusty, we are full-time Kubernetes on our own choice in terms of area.
Mm-hmm.
And I can definitely allocate time for the approval process.
Yeah, I think let's wait for the formality, so we're following all the rules for the 113 cycle. But I have no problems at all with promoting you to approver. Go ahead.
I totally agree. And then, as everyone, you start with the PR you feel confident with, and you ask for help if you are not confident.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think the one thing that's super important, the one thing that we should rally on as a group of approvers, is making sure we're consistent about sort of the user experience from the CLI as well as the config. Those are the two things that are sort of so broadly applicable. Like, we can't unilaterally make decisions, right? Because that could have far-reaching consequences.
Yeah, if we agree on everything, I mean, hopefully the user is going to be content with our decisions. And also, Lucas is going to be back in late December, probably. So he's going to start with university, probably. I'm not sure when, but he is going to be able to help us with ideas too.
Yes, I agree. I'm knowing Lucas, I'm almost certain he will spend a lot of free time, even though I will advise against it, working on this stuff.
We can discuss the phases and stuff with Fabrizio offline. I really don't have anything else. If anybody has topics.
No, I think we've unblocked the two major ones that are currently in flight. One was the Stack Masters, and the other phases work is already.
I have only really a quick one, which is the first issue in the list. Is the because people are this is already a PR. So because basically there was some comment talking that we would like to switch to errors.
Mm-hmm.
And I open an issue, and there are already two PR in flight.
Yep, I've already approved them too, so I already looked through it. I'm very
okay. So basically, there is consensus that, and we will follow up with new contributor for execution. That's it.
I do want to spend time. We have some backlog issues currently, both in curating the kubeadm backlog for 113 to make sure it's up to date. The second is cleaning out the upstream KK repo for all kubeadm things. I do that typically a couple times a cycle, but I think as part of getting folks up to approval level is to do that together. Maybe some other time this week or early next week.
I'm fine with that. You just pick a time and let me know in Slack, and hopefully we can agree on a time.
Okay. I'm up to. I have some busy agenda tomorrow, but if I can join, I will join happily.
Okay. I think the last thing was who is going to KubeCon North America?
So unfortunately, I'm not going. First, they told me that I cannot go because I don't have a talk or something like that. But then they saw that I'm very active and they wanted me to go. But right now, the final decision is that I'm not going. But I'm going next year to Europe.
Okay. Barcelona is better than Seattle, anyways. Just saying.
I'm waiting for an answer. I hope to know it in a few days.
Yeah. So the reason why I ask is I wanted to add folks, if they wanted to be a co-presenter as part of the kubeadm deep dive, I'd be happy to add them if they can make it. But I do know that, employers traveling across the pond and all the other logistics that come with it is not trivial.
Yeah, yes, but nevertheless, even if I will join or not, I think that with this time, I'm in for helping in preparing the documentation, the presentation, and I think that we should add, we should make people aware of what we are doing at the SIG, so all the project, how they relate to, because in my opinion, it is interesting to make people aware how the different projects are related together. Yeah,
I think that's part of the restructuring that I've been trying to do with the SIG cluster lifecycle call has been about we should do periodic readouts for all the different subprojects and how they interrelate. So that way folks can get a broad swath of understanding of what's going on with inside of the SIG, because there's a ton of stuff going on. And speaking of which, I need to follow up with the KubeSpray folks today. So.
Yeah, so the status updates from the subprojects, you can do them every N number of meetings, every 5 or something like that. I don't know.
Well, it depends upon the cycle, right? Like different folks are super heavy and busy in their process. Doing things at the beginning/end of a cycle is probably easier for folks because they have they know what they did and they also know, they have an idea of what's coming, whether or not they're able to deliver on it, and they could also do a call for help, right? Everybody's got a ton of meetings. The problem with the community is there's too many meetings already. So, adding that to their periodic update isn't necessarily beneficial for everybody. I think I don't want to force it, but I think forcing once a quarter is totally legit.
Yeah, they should know, like, instead of pinging individual sub-projects, we should, like, if we hard code this meeting at the beginning of the cycle, everybody can join if they can. Like.
Yep. We started last cycle that way, so I think we should start the next cycle that way too, or nearing the end of this cycle, maybe we can have a roundup and then reconvene.
Yeah, sounds good.
Are there any other last topics for today? Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you.